The letter arrived in the wrong tent at sundown, carried by a courier who could not read, and it landed on a war table between a map of the northern passes and a dagger that had ended 3 rebellions. The Alpha King picked it up with the same hand that had signed death warrants, and the moment he smelled lavender and beeswax on the paper, his heart did something it had no permission to do. Because the king knew that scent. He had spent the last 3 weeks rolling in it, letting a barefoot Omega girl pull burrs from his fur, pretending to be an ordinary lost wolf while she fed him her supper and called him Bramble. He should have left after the first night. He had told himself that every night since. Now her handwriting was in his hands, and it began with the words, "To the owner of the great black wolf, I do not know your name, but I think I am in love, and I need to confess it to someone before it burns a hole in me." Theron, Alpha King of the 9 packs, read the letter 4 times, standing up and once sitting down. It had been meant for the kennel master's tent, 3 rows east. The courier had counted wrong. 1 small mistake, 1 wrong tent, and the most feared man on the continent sat alone in candlelight, reading a love letter about himself, written by a girl who had no idea he existed. She had written, "Your wolf comes to my hives at dusk. He pretends he is not begging, but he begs. He stole my grey shawl on the 9th night, and I let him keep it because he sleeps on it, and I did not have the heart. Please do not punish him for the shawl. Also, I must tell someone this, and you are a stranger, so you are safe. I talk to him. I tell him everything. I have not had anyone to tell things to in 4 years, and your wolf listens like the words matter. Whoever you are, you own the only creature in this camp that has ever chosen me. If you ever mean to leave the gathering, I beg you, come tell me first, so I can say goodbye to him properly. Signed, the honey girl at the east fence, the one the Stonefall pack threw away. You have probably heard the stories. Most of them are true, except the ones that matter. Theron set the letter down. He picked it up again. His beta, a scarred and patient man named Feld, chose that exact moment to enter with the night reports, and found his king holding a piece of paper the way other men hold newborns. Feld said carefully, "My king, you've been in the eastern quarter again. I can smell the lavender from here." "The eastern fence is a security concern," said the Alpha King of the 9 packs. "It is a beehive, sire." "Bees," said Theron, folding the letter into his breast pocket, over his heart, where it would remain for reasons of state, are notoriously unpredictable. He had planned to leave the gathering camp within the week. Sign the treaties, choose a political lunar from the candidates the council kept parading past him like horses at auction, and ride north before the snows. I had planned wrong. To understand how a king ended up in a love letter, you have to go back 3 weeks, to the night Wren of No Pack heard something dying in her lavender. She was 22, and she made her living at the ragged east edge of the great gathering camp, where the 9 packs met once a decade to trade, treaty, and marry. Her mother had been a bone setter for Stonefall until a fever took her, and the debts her mother left behind had been paid with Wren herself, cast out at 18 with a bee-skep, a mule, and her mother's stitching kit. Now she rendered honey salve for wounds and stitched up the hunting hounds that the great packs valued too much to lose and too little to tend gently. Her hands were scarred in small crescents, the exact shape of a frightened dog's teeth, because she never muzzled them. She said a muzzle taught an animal that pain came from people. She would rather bleed a little and be trusted. That night she was sealing jars by lamplight, wax under her fingernails, when she heard the sound. Not a howl, a low, furious, wet growling. The sound of something enormous that would rather die than admit it was in trouble. She took the lamp and went out in her night-dress, because that was the kind of decision Wren made. The wolf was black, and he was the biggest living thing she had ever seen. His shoulder came to her ribs. His left forepaw was wrapped in a poacher's snare wire, the cruel kind with barbs, and he had dragged the stake out of the ground and hauled it through 1/2 a mile of bramble by the look of his coat. Blood dripped off the wire in slow beads that went black in the lamplight. His eyes were gold, and they fixed on her with an expression she would later swear was embarrassment. Here is what the wolf was thinking, because the wolf was a king. Theron had gone out alone in his wolf shape to scout the tree line, because he trusted no one's eyes but his own, and he had stepped in a snare like a yearling pup, 40 years old, an alpha king, undefeated in single combat, caught in a poacher's wire like a rabbit. He had been about to shift to his human form and simply unwind it, humiliation witnessed by no one. When the lamp came bobbing through the lavender rose and a small omega in a patched night-dress looked at him, all fangs and blood and 400 pounds of apex predator, and said, "Oh, you poor, stupid, gorgeous thing. Who did this to you?" "I should leave," thought the king. "I should growl once, and she will run, and I will deal with this alone, as I deal with everything." She sat down in the dirt, inside his reach, inside the killing circle of a wounded alpha wolf, which was a thing seasoned warriors would not do, and she did it the way other people sit down at a table. "This is going to hurt," she told him, "and you're going to let me anyway, because you didn't drag that stake all the way here to bleed to death in my flowers. Bite me if you have to. Everyone else does." Then she took his massive paw in her small, scarred hands, and she began working the barbs free one by one, and she talked the entire time. She told him the wire came from the Rivermark trappers. She recognized the twist of it. She told him bees sleep in clusters in the cold and take turns being on the outside, which she thought was the most decent arrangement she'd ever heard of, better than anything wolves had come up with. She told him her name was Wren, like the bird, small and loud. When the 4th barb came out, he made a sound in his chest, and instead of flinching, she leaned her forehead briefly against his skull, between his ears, and said, I know, almost." No one had touched the Alpha King, without permission, in 19 years. He stood there in the lamplight and let a stranger hold his head, and something behind his ribs, something old and patient, and until now silent, opened one eye and said, "Mate." "No," said the king. "Mate," said the wolf, and would not be argued with. She packed the wounds with honey salve. Then, because the blood and bramble sap had matted him to the skin, she heated water over her little fire, and she bathed him. A wash-tub meant for laundry, a horse-brush, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, working the filth out of a coat that royal groomers were flogged for touching wrong. He should have stopped her. He stood in the tub like a mountain in a puddle and let her scrub, and when she poured the warm water down his spine, he closed his eyes, and his tail moved once, side to side, entirely, without his authorization. "There he is," Wren laughed, wiping her cheek with her wrist and leaving a stripe of soap. "There's the dog under all that dignity. I am the Alpha King of the 9 packs, thought Theron, dripping. His tail wagged again. She fed him her own supper, barley and the end of a smoked fish, and apologized to him that it wasn't meat. She made him a bed of empty sacks by the fire. And at dawn, when he limped to the edge of the lavender and looked back, she raised her hand and said, "You know where the fish is, Bramble." Bramble. She had named the Alpha King after a weed. He returned the next night. Reconnaissance, he told himself. And the night after. Perimeter secure. By the 6th night he was arriving at dusk and leaving at dawn. And Feld had begun looking at the lavender, clinging to the royal cloaks, with the expression of a man aging rapidly. This is where the crimes began. The shawl was first. Grey wool, worn soft, hanging on her fence line to air. It smelled of her, of lavender and smoke, and the particular warm bread scent of an omega. And the wolf looked at it, and looked at the empty dark fields, and stole it. He carried it home through the sleeping camp in his jaws like a thief, the size of a pony. In the morning, the royal groomers found the Alpha King's wolf asleep in his private quarters, with his nose buried in a patched grey shawl, and were wise enough to say nothing forever. There was a shawl on the perimeter, the king informed Feld, unprompted, at the morning briefing. It constituted a hazard. It has been secured. Secured, sire. Contained, for the safety of the camp. Of course, sire, said Feld, and wrote nothing down, because there was nothing that could be written down. Then came the gifts, because a wolf who has taken from his mate must provide. This is simply law. The first was a rabbit, fat and clean killed, left on her doorstep. Wren accepted it with delight. The second was a pheasant. The third, and this is where the trouble showed, was a comb of carved silver and mother of pearl, crafted by the master artisans of the southern coast, part of the royal treasury, priceless, and dropped in the dirt outside her tent by an animal, slightly chewed. Wren turned it over in her hands with horror. Bramble, Bramble, where did you get it, this? This belongs to somebody. Somebody rich. Somebody who will hang me. She tried to give it back. She held it out, and he sat there, ears up, radiating pride, refusing, until she gave up and hid it at the bottom of her herb chest, whispering, "You are a criminal, and I am now your accomplice. I hope you're happy." I was. I was so happy it frightened him. Meanwhile, in the treasury tent, an inventory clerk reported the comb missing, and the Alpha King, without looking up from his maps, said, "The comb has been reallocated," in a tone that ended inventory as a practice. The cot was the escalation that could not be explained away. It was the first hard frost of autumn, and Wren woke at midnight because her narrow rope cot was groaning, and a black wolf the size of her entire furniture collection was easing onto it beside her one deliberate paw at a time, with the intense concentration of a burglar, apparently under the belief that if he moved slowly enough, he was invisible. "Bramble," she said. "No." He froze, one paw lifted. Golden eyes, injured innocence. "You have a bed. I made you a bed." The lifted paw came down on the cot. Then, gravity accepting a bribe, 400 pounds of Alpha King poured slowly onto the bed of a penniless Omega, curled around her back with his great head over her shoulder, sighed like a landslide, settling, and slept. Wren lay pinned in the warmest place she had been in 4 years, laughing silently into the dark, and then not laughing, just breathing, one hand buried in the fur of his chest where she could feel his heart going like a war drum. She fell asleep to it. The king did not sleep for a long while. He lay listening to her breathe and conducted the following negotiation with himself. This is a security measure. She is warmer this way. Frost kills Omegas. This is practically policy. I will leave before dawn. I will not do this again. The wolf inside him, who was him, who had always been him, replied, "You are lying in every possible direction at once," and pulled her infinitesimally closer with one paw. That was the 9th night. On the 21st, she wrote the letter. On the 22nd, a courier miscounted the tent rows, and the world changed. The morning after he read her letter, the Alpha King did something unprecedented. He went to the east fence in daylight, on 2 legs. Wren was elbow-deep in an injured hound, a rivermark bitch with a slashed flank, no muzzle, her forearm resting in the dog's mouth so it would have something to grip that wasn't panic when a shadow fell across her work. She glanced up and saw black boots, a black coat, and a face she knew from coins. Every soul in the camp knew that face. She scrambled to rise. The dog whined, and the king said, "Don't." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Finish. The animal comes first." So the pariah of Stone Fall stitched a dog, while the Alpha King of the 9 packs stood in her herb rows and watched her hands. And behind his ribs the wolf howled the whole time. "She is right there, she is right there," and he told it. Quiet. And it did not go quiet. She tied off the last stitch, wiped her bloody forearm, and bowed the way you bow when you learned it from watching, not teaching. "Sire, forgive me, I don't. I mean, I have salves, if the royal kennels need. I can't imagine why else." "There is a wolf," said Theron. He had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed this for 2 hours, and it had gone better in rehearsal. "A large black wolf, loose in this quarter. I am told he frequents your fence." Her whole face changed, and that was the moment the king understood he was in mortal danger, because she lit up over the wolf, and he was the wolf, and she must never know. And he wanted her to look at his human face that way. And she was looking at his human face the way you look at tax collectors. "Bramble," she said. "Is he yours, sire? Say yes." "Say yes, he is mine. And the letter reached me, and I have read it 11 times, and it is in my pocket now." "I is known to me," said the king. "He's no trouble," she said quickly, stepping between the king and the lavender, as if to shield the absent wolf's reputation with her body. "Whatever anyone's reported, it's my fault I fed him, sire. If there's a fine, I'll pay it." She had nothing, and she was offering to pay the wolf's fines. Theron looked at this Omega in a patched apron, guarding his own honor from him, and said, in a voice Feld would not have recognized, "There is no fine. See that he continues to be fed." He paused. "The crown will provide the fish." He left. Wren stood in the lavender, with her heart hammering, thinking, well, that was the strangest and coldest man alive, poor Bramble. No wonder he runs off at night. That night, the wolf arrived with a whole salmon. The days took on a double rhythm, and the camp began, quietly, to go mad. By day, the Alpha King found reasons. The eastern fence needed inspecting weekly, then daily. Royal hounds developed a suspicious number of minor injuries, requiring the honey girl specifically, until the kennel master, doing arithmetic in his head, went pale and started scheduling them himself. The king in his human shape was stiff, curt, impossible, standing at the edge of her camp asking questions like, "And the wolf, is he well?" while Wren answered politely and privately concluded the ruler of the known world was lonely in some way she couldn't name and didn't dare pity. By night, Bramble had abandoned all pretense. He arrived at dusk, herded her toward supper with his shoulder. If she worked too late, lay across her feet while she sealed jars and had annexed 2/3 of the cot as sovereign territory. She talked to him the way she wrote in the letter. Everything, and the camp watched their king smell of lavender, and drew conclusions, and the conclusions reached the council, and the council decided the situation required a solution. The solution's name was Lady Seraphine of the Silverpine Coast, and she arrived with 19 wagons. She was, in fairness, magnificent. Tall, silver-braided, raised from the cradle to be a queen, with a treaty's worth of harbours in her dowry, and a smile that had been practised in mirrors until it fit every occasion. Elder Morgrim, the council's oldest voice, presented her at the high fire like a man laying down a winning card. Silverpine's harbours, sire, would end the coastal raids in a season. The match writes itself. Then let the match marry itself, said the king, and left the fire, and the whole assembly heard it, and Seraphine stood in front of 9 packs with her practised smile, holding up nothing. She did not cry. She had been taught not to at 11 years old. But the next afternoon, she walked the camp to be seen, as her mother had taught her, chin high, and her path took her past the east fence, where a small omega was hauling a honey crate too heavy for her, and the crate slipped. Seraphine caught it. Reflex before rank could intervene. For a moment, the 2 women held the crate together, and Seraphine looked at the scarred hands opposite hers, and the lavender scent reached her. The same scent the entire council whispered about clinging to the king, and she understood in one cold drop exactly who this was. She could have destroyed her with a sentence. Rank alone would have done it. Instead, Seraphine set the crate on the fence post, looked at Wren's chapped knuckles, and heard herself say, tired, true, unpracticed, "Do you know what it is to be raised as a treaty? They started fitting me for this when I was 6. 60 wagons of my grandmother's furniture, 4 languages, and I have never once chosen anything." She straightened, and the smile came back on like armor. "The honey. I'll take 2 jars. My grandmother swore by it for the hands." She paid triple and walked away, and Wren stared after her, thinking she had either made a friend or met a storm, and was not wrong on either count. But it was not Seraphine who broke the king's control. It was a courier boy. His name was Tam. He ran messages for the Rivermark delegation. He was 20, sunny, and entirely uncomplicated, and he had been finding excuses to pass the east fence for a week. He brought Wren a honey cake from the Rivermark bakers. He fixed her fence latch without being asked. And one gold evening, while the king approached in human shape for his daily inspection of the wolf's welfare, Tam was teaching Wren a Rivermark hand game, both of them laughing, and on a miss, his hand caught hers and held it a beat too long. The sound that came out of the alpha king of the 9 packs was not a human sound. It rolled across the herb rows, flattening the laughter, a subsonic alpha growl with the full weight of a crown behind it, and every animal within 200 yards went silent, and Tam went white to the hairline and discovered urgent business elsewhere at a speed just short of running. Wren turned and found the king standing in her lavender, with his eyes gone full gold, human hands shaking with the effort of staying human hands. "Sire," she said, bewildered, a little frightened, and, though she could not have explained it, a little warm. "He's just a boy. He brought cake." He touched. The king stopped, breathed, rebuilt the sentence from wreckage. "The fence latch is crown property. He will be invoiced." And he turned and walked into the dark with his hands in fists, and behind his ribs the wolf raged. "That is our mate. Tell her, tell her." and for the first time the man had no argument left, only fear, because kings are not permitted to be refused. And if she knew, and if she looked at him with betrayal instead of that fire-lit softness, he did not know what would be left of him. That night she told the wolf about it. She sat on the cot with his huge head in her lap, working a burr out from behind his ear. And she said, "The strangest thing happened. The king growled at Tam. Like an actual, I thought the ground was shaking." Her fingers moved through his fur. "And here's the mad part, Bramble, and I'll only say it to you, because you can't repeat it. For about one heartbeat, I liked it. Being growled over. Me. Isn't that pathetic?" She laughed at herself, and then didn't. The fire cracked. "Nobody ever fought over me, you know. Stonefall didn't even argue when the debt collectors named their price. My own pack, and there wasn't one raised voice in that room. I counted." Her hand went still in his fur. "So one growl from a stranger, and I'm sitting here feeling. Anyway." She bent and pressed her face into his neck, and the king lay absolutely still, holding the entire confession like a live coal. And she murmured into his fur, "You'd fight for me, though, wouldn't you? You're the only one." "Tell her," said the wolf. "Tomorrow," said the man, and for once he almost meant it. The rogues came instead. It was Elder Morgrim's doing, though the old wolf would have called it statecraft. He had watched 40 years of politics, and one truth had carved itself into him. Alliances end wars, and infatuations start them, and the king's lavender obsession was sinking a harbor treaty that would save coastal villages. Morgrim had personally watched burn in the last war. He genuinely believed that. Sitting alone before he gave the order, he took out a river stone he had carried since a burned village called Marrow Bay, turned it over twice in his old fingers, and told himself that one Omega frightened off, not harmed, merely frightened north to some far town with silver in her pocket, was a small cruelty against a burning coast. Then he hired 4 rogues out of the tree line, paid in coin that couldn't be traced, and told them, "Frighten the girl at the east fence off the campgrounds. No blood." Rogues are rogues, because no one's rules survive in them. They came at moonset, and they smelled the honey and the mule and a lone Omega with no pack mark, which in rogue arithmetic added up to plunder, and the part about no blood dissolved on the walk over. Wren woke to her hives crashing over. She was out the tent flap before fear could stop her, because the bees were 60,000 lives in her keeping, and she got one skep upright before a hand closed on her arm and wrenched her around, and she was looking into a scarred grin with filed teeth, and she understood, with a terrible clarity, exactly how far away help was. Then the knight behind the rogue stood up. Bramble came over the fence like black water, and the first rogue never made a sound. The other 3 turned and fought, because 4 against 1 wolf is winning arithmetic, and against any other wolf it would have been. It was not clean. Wren, backed against her overturned hives with a hive tool clutched like a dagger, watched her gentle bed thief become something out of the old stories, and even so, 4 is 4. A blade found his shoulder. He took the second rogue down, and the third opened his flank, and Wren screamed his name, and the last 2 rogues, bleeding, desperate, done with subtlety, seized her together and dragged her toward the river gate, and one of them had steel at her throat, and the wolf, wounded, outnumbered, watching steel touch his mate's skin, did the only thing left. He shifted, black fur, poured away like smoke. Bone reshaped. And between one heartbeat and the next there was no wolf. There was a man rising out of the wreckage, with golden eyes and blood sheeting down his shoulder, and his voice hit the rogues with the full crushing weight of an Alpha King's command. "Release her! Kneel! Rogues have no king." Their bodies knelt anyway. The steel rang on the stones, and Ren stood free and untouched in the moonlight, staring at the naked, bleeding, unmistakable face of the Alpha King of the 9 packs, standing exactly where her wolf had been. The guards arrived to a strange tableau. 4 rogues kneeling, the king bleeding, and the honey girl backing away from him with her hand over her mouth. "Ren," said the king. "Bramble," she said. Not a question, a verdict. "I can, Ren, let me. I bathed you." Her voice cracked upward. She was doing terrible mathematics at speed, 3 weeks of it, and every answer was worse. "I bathed you in my laundry tub. I slept, oh no. I told you things." The look on her face was the one he had feared, and it was worse than he had feared, because under the fury it was simply hurt. The hurt of a person whose one safe place had turned out to have a hidden door. "You listened to everything, the growling, the I said I liked, and you were, the whole time you were." She grabbed the nearest object, which was a jar of honey salve, and threw it at the king of the 9 packs with all her strength. He let it hit him. It shattered on his wounded shoulder, and he did not move. "Everyone else, at least, told me to my face I was worth nothing. You're the first one who lied to make me feel like I was worth something. That's worse. That is worse, sire." She said sire like a slap. Then she walked into her tent, past the guards, past the kneeling rogues, and laced the flap shut, and the Alpha King stood bleeding in her ruined garden, and no power he owned could open a laced tent flap, and he knew it. He came back the next night on 4 legs, and lay down in the rain outside her tent, and she did not come out. Feld arrived at dawn with a cloak and an escort, and the king sent them away. The camp held its breath. The council convened in emergency session, and Elder Morgrim, grey-faced, watching the trail of his hired rogues wind toward his own tent under interrogation, discovered that the coast he'd meant to save could not save him. On the 2nd night, the flap opened 1 hand's width. "You don't get the wolf," Ren said through the gap. Her eyes were swollen, and her voice was flat and steady, the voice she used on biting dogs. The wolf was easy to love because he couldn't lie. Turns out he was the lie. So if there's anything real in all this, it comes in here on 2 legs, with words, and it explains every single thing. Every single thing. So the Alpha King of the 9 packs shifted and dressed in the clothes Feld had left folded on her fence 3 days running, and ducked into a patched tent. He filled like a bear in a cupboard, and sat where she pointed on the floor and confessed. It took a long time, because she made him itemize. "The shawl," he said, and set it on the floor between them, washed, folded, and visibly slept on. "Was me. I told my beta it was a security hazard. I have slept on it every night I was not here." "The comb," he winced. "The Royal Treasury lists it as reallocated. I chewed it slightly on the way." "I don't." "The wolf felt strongly that you should have it." "The salmon, requisitioned from my own table. The kitchens believe I developed a passion for fish. There is now salmon at every royal meal. I hate salmon, Ren. The night the smoked fish went missing from my cache in week 2. A pause, That predates my honor, yes, also me. And the letter. Her voice went quiet there, and dangerous. My letter. To the kennel master. Arrived at my tent by a courier's miscount. He drew it from his breast pocket, and she saw the folds, soft as cloth. The folds of paper opened and closed 100 times, and something in her chest turned over against her will. I've read it every day. It is the only thing anyone has ever written to me that was not addressed to the crown. You wrote that my wolf was the only creature that ever chose you. His voice, the voice that moved armies, failed and restarted, smaller. You have it backwards. I am a king, Wren. Everything I have was inherited, or taken, or owed. You fed me your own supper when you thought I was a stray. You are the only thing in my whole life that I did not command, and could not buy, and chose me anyway, without knowing there was a single reason to. And I let the lie go on, because I could not survive watching that stop. The tent was silent. Outside, the bees were rebuilding. You growled at Tam, she said at last. I have also invoiced Rivermark for the fence latch, said the king, with the ghastly honesty of a man past saving. I am not proud of either. That is untrue. I am slightly proud of the growl. And Wren, exhausted, betrayed, furious, in love, put her face in her hands and laughed until she cried, and then just cried, and the king crossed the floor on his knees and stopped, one hand's width away, and waited. And she was the one who closed the distance, fisting both hands in his shirt, forehead against his collarbone, mumbling, "You absolute burr-riddled disaster of a man." You could have just said hello. I am aware, said the Alpha King into her hair, arms closing around her like a gate, that hello was available. The wolf outvoted me. 3 days later, the council convened at the high fire before all 9 packs to hear judgments, and got more than the docket promised. Elder Morgrim was stripped and sentenced, and here the record shows one oddity, that the Omega he had tried to drive out spoke a word for him, saying she'd been priced and shipped by practical old men before, and she'd rather he spend his exile digging fire breaks on the coast. He was so worried about than rotting uselessly, and the king, jaw tight, allowed it. Morgrim looked at her a long moment, took the riverstone from his pocket, and set it down on the judgment table without a word, and no one but Wren ever wondered what it was. Lady Seraphine rose next, expecting to be diplomatically shipped home, and instead the king dissolved the marriage negotiation with full honors, ceded the harbor tariff dispute in Silverpine's favor outright, and named her crown envoy to the coast, answerable to no one but herself. For one unguarded moment, her practiced smile fell off, and something younger stood in its place. Passing Wren on her way from the fire, she paused and said low, 2 more jars before I sail, for my grandmother's hands, and that was the whole peace treaty between them, and it held for life. Then the Alpha King of the 9 packs stepped down from the dais, crossed the assembly ground past every noble line of every pack, and knelt in the dirt in front of the Omega that Stonefall had sold for a debt. 9 packs bear witness, he said, and his voice carried to the last row of tents. This is Wren, healer of the East Fence, keeper of hounds and bees, and she is mine. Whoever slights her slights the crown. Whoever harms her answers as to my teeth. She is mine, and I am his, Wren finished loudly to the entire continent, because she had decided the night before that she was through letting other people announce her price. He's mine. I fished him out of a snare, I washed him, I fed him, and by every law of the 9 packs, that makes him mine. Check the law on strays. She looked out at the sea of stunned nobility, at the Stonefall delegation in the 3rd row, discovering true religious terror, and added, I keep what I heal. The silence broke into a roar, and somewhere in it, Feld could be seen putting his face into one hand in a manner that was almost certainly weeping, and would be officially recorded as wind. The claiming mark, when it came private and gentle under a healer's moon, lavender crushed sweet under the tent floor, and the bond snapped into place between them, like a latch finally finding its catch, and in the first flood of it, Wren heard, faint and forever, the underhum of his heart going like a war drum, the same drum she'd fallen asleep to on the 9th night, and she laughed against his throat, because she realized she'd been listening to the truth all along. Winter came to the North Courts, and with it a scandal the histories tactfully compress, namely that the new Luna of the 9 packs kept bees on the palace roof, stitched the royal hounds herself without a muzzle, and was on documented occasions found asleep in the council chamber under 400 pounds of Alpha King in wolf form, treaty papers rising and falling gently on his flank. On the first snowy evening, she sat by the great hearth with his massive black head in her lap, working through his fur with the silver comb, the chewed one. She had refused all replacements. Behind his left ear, her fingers found a burr, carried in from the pine hills, because some things about him were never going to be fixed. She worked it loose, held it up to the firelight, and flicked it at the crown sitting on its cushion across the room. It bounced off the gold with a tiny ping. The wolf's tail thumped the floor twice. Don't act innocent, said the Luna of the 9 packs, scratching behind his ear, and on the table, beside her, lay a folded paper, soft creased from 100 openings, addressed in her own hand, to the owner of the great black wolf, and underneath, in fresh dark ink pressed there by a king, one word had been added: delivered.